There's a personality type that society secretly exploits, and they do it willingly. They are the ones who say yes when they mean no, who absorb criticism like emotional punching bags, who burn themselves out trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. They overcommit to the point of exhaustion, take on responsibilities that aren't theirs to carry, and then blame themselves when others inevitably disappoint them. They are ENFJs, the protagonists, and their greatest tragedy is that their most beautiful qualities become the source of their deepest suffering. These individuals possess what psychologists call overwhelming sensitivity. They take feedback personally even when it's constructive, spend days ruminating over why someone doesn't like them, and become paralyzed by the fear of disappointing others. They are hypersensitive to criticism, overly concerned with others' opinions, and prone to self-deprecating thoughts that spiral into crushing self-doubt. But the real psychological damage comes from their compulsive need to please. ENFJs struggle with an almost pathological inability to say no. They overextend themselves repeatedly, prioritizing everyone else's needs over their own until they reach complete burnout. They become emotional doormats, allowing others to take advantage of their giving nature while building up dangerous levels of resentment underneath their caring facade. When ENFJs don't receive the same level of care they give to others, which is almost always, they don't just feel disappointed, they feel betrayed. They expect others to read their minds and anticipate their needs the way they do for everyone else. And when this doesn't happen, they become bitter and withdrawn. The very people everyone turns to for emotional support end up feeling the most emotionally neglected. Perhaps most damaging of all is their relationship with conflict. ENFJs are so terrified of confrontation that they will sacrifice their own well-being to maintain surface-level harmony. They avoid difficult conversations, allow problems to fester, and enable toxic behavior rather than risk upsetting anyone. This conflict avoidance doesn't preserve relationships, it destroys them slowly from the inside. In their unhealthy states, ENFJs can become manipulative and controlling, using their deep understanding of human psychology not to heal, but to coerce. They may build armies against people they dislike, exaggerate their abilities to gain approval, and force unwanted change on others under the guise of helping. The most heartbreaking part is that ENFJs don't even recognize they're being exploited. They've been conditioned to believe that their worth comes from their usefulness to others, that love must be earned through endless giving, and that their own needs are somehow less important than everyone else's. This is the hidden darkness behind the most beloved personality type, a psychological prison built from good intentions, maintained by society's expectations, and locked from the inside by their own desperate need to be needed. There's a psychological phenomenon that ENFJs know all too well, though they rarely have a name for it. It's called empathy burnout, and it happens when your emotional boundaries become so porous that you can no longer distinguish between your feelings and everyone else's. Imagine being a sponge that never stops absorbing, becoming saturated with emotions that don't even belong to you. ENFJs don't just observe emotions, they absorb them. Their dominant cognitive function, extroverted feeling, acts like an emotional antenna that's always extended, picking up the subtle frequencies of every person in their vicinity. They feel the anxiety of their stressed colleague, the sadness of their friend going through a breakup, the anger of a stranger on the subway. And often they mistake these absorbed emotions for their own. This isn't a conscious choice. It's more like having a radio that can't be turned off, constantly tuning into emotional stations whether you want to or not. The result is a deep, soul-level exhaustion that sleep can't cure. It's the tiredness that comes from carrying not just your own emotional load, but the collective weight of everyone around you. But here's where it gets more complex. Society has learned to exploit this sensitivity. People are drawn to ENFJs like moths to flame, sensing unconsciously that here is someone who will truly listen, who will understand, who will hold space for their pain. The ENFJ becomes the unofficial therapist in their friend group, the emotional dumping ground, the one who always has time for other people's problems. The irony is devastating. The very people who most need emotional support, who carry the weight of their own complex inner world plus the absorbed emotions of others, become the ones everyone else turns to for comfort. It's like asking someone who's already drowning to save others from drowning. This creates what psychologists call emotional asymmetry. ENFJs give profoundly, but struggle to receive at the same depth. They become experts at supporting others, but often feel like they're speaking a foreign language when trying to express their own needs. Their emotional needs are complex, nuanced, and often difficult for others to understand. They can't be fixed with platitudes or surface-level reassurances. The result is a particular kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being misunderstood. It's the loneliness of carrying thoughts and feelings that seem too complex for others to handle. It's the exhaustion of always being the strong one, the wise one, the one who has it all figured out, when inside they're often just as lost as everyone else. Behind every ENFJ's caring smile lies a relentless inner critic that never sleeps, never rests, never stops whispering that they're not doing enough, not being enough, not caring enough. This is the perfectionist prison that so many ENFJs find themselves trapped within, a psychological cage built from impossible standards and reinforced by their own compassionate nature. ENFJs set impossibly high standards not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. They envision a world where relationships are authentic, where people communicate openly, where conflicts are resolved with understanding and empathy. When reality fails to meet these idealistic expectations, the ENFJ doesn't usually blame the world, they blame themselves. Their auxiliary function, introverted intuition, constantly generates visions of how things could be better, how relationships could be deeper, how conflicts could be resolved more harmoniously. This future-focused perspective is both a gift and a curse. It allows them to inspire and guide others toward growth, but it also means they're perpetually dissatisfied with the present reality. The perfectionist trap manifests in chronic worry and anxiety. ENFJs imagine worst-case scenarios not because they're pessimistic, but because their dominant feeling function is constantly scanning for potential relationship threats. They worry excessively about outcomes, replaying conversations in their minds, analyzing every subtle shift in tone or expression for signs that they've somehow failed to meet someone's needs. This perfectionism extends to their expectations of others, which creates a painful cycle of disappointment. When someone they care about behaves selfishly or fails to live up to their potential, the ENFJ takes it personally. They wonder what they could have done differently, how they could have been more supportive, more understanding, more helpful. The cruel irony is that this perfectionism often prevents ENFJs from forming the authentic connections they crave. They become so focused on being what others need that they forget how to be themselves. They craft carefully curated versions of themselves, designed to be palatable, helpful, and non-threatening. But in doing so, they deprive others of the opportunity to know and love their authentic selves. This perfectionist prison is reinforced by society's tendency to reward ENFJs for their caretaking behavior while ignoring their own needs. They become addicted to being needed, to being the solution to other people's problems, because it's the one area where they consistently receive positive feedback. But this addiction comes at the cost of their own emotional well-being and authentic self-expression. Every hero has a shadow, and the ENFJ's shadow is darker and more complex than most people realize. When the natural compassion and idealism of the protagonist becomes corrupted by pain, rejection, or exhaustion, it can transform into something manipulative and controlling. This is the side of ENFJs that they rarely acknowledge, even to themselves. The unhealthy ENFJ can become a master manipulator, using their deep understanding of human emotion not to heal, but to control. They know exactly which emotional buttons to press, which vulnerabilities to exploit, which fears to trigger. They might use guilt trips, emotional blackmail, or passive-aggressive behavior to get their way. The person who once inspired others toward growth becomes someone who stunts it through emotional manipulation. This shadow emerges when ENFJs develop what psychologists call a messianic complex. They begin to believe that they are meant to save everyone, that others cannot function without their guidance and support. This belief system justifies increasingly controlling behavior as they convince themselves that they know what's best for everyone around them. The ENFJ shadow is particularly dangerous because it often masquerades as caring. The manipulative ENFJ might say they're just trying to help or looking out for your best interests, while systematically undermining your confidence in your own judgment. They might create dependency relationships where others become reliant on their emotional support, then use that dependency as leverage. Their shadow functions become active in unhealthy states. When their opposing function, introverted feeling, takes over, they become self-centered and focused solely on their own values and emotions. They might become hypercritical of others, holding them to impossible standards while excusing their own behavior. Their critical thinking function, extroverted thinking, might manifest as harsh judgment and systematic control over others' choices. The ENFJ shadow also emerges in their relationship with themselves. They might develop narcissistic tendencies, believing they are inherently more evolved, more caring, or more insightful than others. This false sense of superiority masks deep insecurity and self-doubt, but it can lead to condescending behavior and emotional abuse disguised as guidance. Perhaps most tragically, the ENFJ shadow often emerges when they've been repeatedly hurt or rejected for their authentic caring. They learn to weaponize their emotional intelligence as a form of protection, using their understanding of others to maintain distance rather than create connection. The wounded healer becomes the manipulative controller, protecting their wounded heart by ensuring they maintain power in every relationship. Picture this: a room full of people who adore you, seek your advice, and feel better just by being in your presence. Yet despite being surrounded by admirers and friends, you feel profoundly alone. This is the central paradox of the ENFJ experience, a loneliness so deep it can't be cured by company, because it's not the absence of people that creates it, it's the absence of being truly known. ENFJs often feel like emotional chameleons, constantly adapting their energy to match what others need from them. They become so skilled at reading the room and adjusting their personality accordingly that they lose touch with their authentic selves. It's not conscious deception, it's survival. They've learned through painful experience that their unfiltered authenticity can be too much for most people to handle. This creates a devastating cycle. The more they adapt themselves to be palatable to others, the lonelier they become, because no one is seeing or loving their true self. They might be surrounded by people who care about the version of them they present to the world, but they remain unknown in their complexity, their doubts, their needs, and their struggles. The ENFJ loneliness is compounded by their natural tendency to focus on others rather than themselves. In any conversation, they're more likely to ask about your problems than share their own. They've become so practiced at being the listener, the supporter, the problem solver, that they've forgotten how to be vulnerable themselves. Even when people do ask how they're doing, ENFJs often deflect with humor or redirect the conversation back to the other person. This isolation is particularly painful because ENFJs are naturally community-oriented. They thrive on connection and shared meaning, yet they often feel like outsiders looking in. They see others forming what appear to be effortless friendships, while they struggle to find people who can match their depth of feeling and thinking. The tragedy is that ENFJs are often beloved by many, but truly known by few. They attract people who need their emotional support, but who aren't equipped to provide the same level of care in return. It's not that these people don't care about the ENFJ, but rather that they don't understand the complexity of the ENFJ's inner world or how to navigate it. This loneliness is different from the kind that can be solved by meeting new people or joining new groups. It's an existential loneliness that comes from feeling fundamentally misunderstood. It's the ache of having so much love to give and so much insight to share, yet feeling like there's no one who truly sees the person behind the caretaker facade. To understand ENFJs, we must understand the psychological architecture that drives their behavior. Their minds are structured around 4 cognitive functions that work together to create their unique perspective on the world, but also generate many of their internal conflicts and struggles. Their dominant function, extroverted feeling, is like having an emotional radar that's always scanning the environment. It picks up on emotional undertones, relationship dynamics, and social atmospheres with remarkable accuracy. This function drives their natural inclination to create harmony and meet others' needs, but it also makes them hypersensitive to any form of interpersonal tension or disapproval. Their auxiliary function, introverted intuition, creates vivid internal visions of future possibilities and potential outcomes. This is what gives ENFJs their visionary quality, their ability to see the best in people and inspire them toward growth. But it also creates chronic dissatisfaction with present reality, as they're constantly comparing what is with what could be. Their tertiary function, extroverted sensing, emerges more strongly as they mature, giving them an appreciation for present moment experiences and sensory pleasures. When healthy, this helps ground their idealistic tendencies. When underdeveloped, it can manifest as escapist behaviors or difficulty staying present in the moment. Their inferior thinking function is their greatest source of internal conflict. This function seeks logical consistency, analytical clarity, and independent reasoning. For ENFJs, who naturally prioritize relationships and emotions, this creates an internal tension between what they think they should do based on logic and what they feel compelled to do based on their values and concern for others. This cognitive structure creates several psychological patterns unique to ENFJs. They often struggle with decision-making when their logical analysis conflicts with their emotional intuition. They might know intellectually that they're being taken advantage of, but their dominant feeling function compels them to continue giving anyway. Their inferior thinking function also creates imposter syndrome in intellectual or analytical environments. Despite often being highly intelligent and insightful, ENFJs may doubt their logical reasoning abilities or feel intimidated in settings that prioritize objective analysis over emotional intelligence. Understanding this cognitive architecture helps explain why ENFJs are simultaneously so capable of understanding others, yet so confused about themselves. Their outward-focused functions excel at reading and responding to others, while their inward-focused functions, particularly their inferior thinking, remain underdeveloped, leaving them with blind spots about their own needs and boundaries.